So I am not Renee. So Renee just called. Renee had surgery 2 days ago. And he was thinking he was going to be able to make it. I don't know what kind of surgery he had, but I cannot make it 3 hours after surgery unless it was my thinking. But he just called and said he was not going to make it. So I'm the second guy. I do nothing about cardiology. I do not know where the heart is. I do know the lungs are the most important organ of the body. Okay? So I'm a pulmonologist. I run the Dana Lorna Corman Respiratory Institute, and I'm the respiratory lead for the respiratory service line of Jefferson Health. And so with me is Ana Maria Lopez, who's going to talk to you a bit about her advocacy work, but also her role as professor and vice chair of medical oncology. So you have a pulmonologist and a cancer person, and that brings us together to lung cancer, which is the most common cause of death in the United States by cancer. But we're here to talk about physician advocacy. And that's an important area that I like to talk about, but I also like to tell stories. So I think I'd rather start with a story, but let me see if I can find, I only have one slide, and it's this one, okay? I'm originally from Puerto Rico. Any Puerto Ricans here? Okay, so after this, over there for rum and coke. Okay? And physician advocacy is an important aspect of what we all should aspire to, but it shouldn't be an individual thing. At some point, we'll get institutions to bring it as part of the general competency of people. And whether it's AGCMB is involved and everybody's sort of going through the same process, so there's involvement at all levels for people who are involved in advocacy. To me, I get to the point, I don't know if some of you who have been at this for a long time, you get kind of tired of seeing all these papers that describe inequity. At some point, I want to see more papers that intervene and develop strategies that change that. You know? So we probably need to get into this mode of, yeah, it's okay to describe the problem so that we can get attention to it and get people engaged, but it's more important than to reverse it and to change it and perhaps even prevent it, okay? Now, one of the things that I'm excited about is when people talk to me about advocacy is the issue of being prepared for opportunity. In other words, advocacy is not always you can go after. You're busy doing your tests and biochemistry and writing your notes and all that, and an opportunity shows up and you missed it, okay? I'm gonna talk to you about a guy who didn't miss it. And this guy is from West Puerto Rico. Okay. Where are you from in Puerto Rico?
Come on.
Something.
But I know better.
Huh? Okay. You know that one. Yeah. So why don't you step up? No. So I'm from Maya West, okay? And in fact, I was baptized in the church of Maya West. And my parents got married in that church over 62 years ago. Okay? Wow, she says, that's not that old. Come on. Well, Ramon Betances was from a family in the island, and he was a smart kid. And he was sent to France, like many people did in those days who had some resources, to become a doctor. And he wrote some papers, and he wrote a book, and he did very well, but he wanted to come back to the island to develop his own practice and have a good life, family and so forth. And when he arrived, he had to put all these dreams away because that city, and in fact, an important part of the island, was being ravaged by cholera. Okay? So now you have this guy who's coming back to develop his practice young, mid-1800s, trying to figure out what to do. And he rolls his sleeves up and starts working. And he starts separating people. He convinces the city government that you have to separate the people who have cholera to the people who are healthy, because if not, we're all going to die. By the end of a number of months, all his physicians, colleagues were dead. He was the only doctor left in the city alive from cholera. Okay? And so after this, he decided to keep going at this aspect of physician advocacy, although he probably didn't recognize that as a term. But one of the things he learned was what was happening with the minorities. There were blacks, there were slaves, okay, folk who didn't have any resources or money. And one of the things he used to do was to go on this side of the church here, on the back. There's a little door where slaves would come in with their babies so that they could be baptized. They were not allowed through the front entrance. But that gave an opportunity because he would have Spanish dollars. He would give them money, and with that money, secretly, they could purchase the freedom of their child. And it took a little while for the government to realize what he was doing. They were not very happy. They're also not very happy that in his practice, and people tell me, what can I do when I have my own practice? In his practice, he often put the people who didn't have money or were minorities in front of the line. It didn't matter if somebody was there from government, if there was a military person or anybody else who was wealthy. He saw these other people first and then saw the others. Okay? And you would think, well, we would lose our practice today. I don't think so. I don't think so. But the important thing is that he actually started doing things, the things that you would consider heroic today. That was considered heroic then. So heroic against what the Spanish government wanted that he was exiled. Not once, not twice, more than 3 times. And he always found a way to come back to the island. Because they were busy doing other stuff, so he snuck in. I don't know how. He started doing his thing. He started buying the freedom of babies. He did all these things back and forth. He got into politics. Suddenly they said, oh my God, Ramon is here. Let's excite him again. And they did that multiple times. Okay? In the end, he becomes a politician. And while he's exiled, he actually helps Cubans. He helps the Dominican Republic. In fact, there are more people in the Caribbean that know about Ramon than people in Puerto Rico. Don't you think? Which is sad. Okay? He actually becomes not only an abolitionist, but actually a revolutionary. And he actually orchestrates what was called a Grito de Mayo, which was a revolution against Spain. Not that he hated Spain, he just wanted freedom for his people. So now you have a physician who's an abolitionist, who's a public health advocate. No, physician advocate. Who's actually did a little bit of research, a revolutionary. And one of the questions that when I go to sleep at night, I think about is how come today we don't have more Ramons? What have we done with our system where we have standardized so much everything? And we have created interventions that sort of ensure that our medical delivery is good. So much so, perhaps, that we prevent from that unique individual to emerge. The whole focus of my discussion today is that I want that mix of one to be in this room. And you might say, well, that was in 1800, 550, and things were different, the economy was different back in Rome, and I'm not expecting you to be at the normal table. I'm not even close to that man. But together, it's another story. Now, so search the Ramon in you. Let's talk after Ana Maria. We're going to have a panel session to discuss how you engage in advocacy. I hope the story is more inspiring than telling you about specifics. But the aspect of looking for opportunity to engage is what's really crucial. Ana Maria.
That was great.
And so I'm Ana Maria Lopez, and I'm a medical oncologist. And I want to tell you a little bit about my work and a little bit about my journey in getting to a place where I think advocacy is really part and parcel of what I do as a physician, so that it's really part and parcel of the healing process. And what I'm going to share with you is signposts in my life and how they led me to where I am. So I started college. I went to Bryn Mawr College, and people that are around here will know that that's nearby. And I studied at Haverford. And then I started medical school at the University of Arizona. And then I transferred to Jefferson, where I graduated my career in work. And when I saw these pictures, I wonder if you can you see one of these things that looks really different? Can you notice anything? I was struck by the incredible blue sky in Arizona. The much dimmer skies in Colorado. But I think that, but again, signposts. And I studied philosophy. I studied political theory. So I really, we thought about these issues, critical thinking, analyzing, and I feel that as a physician, that's the most important skill that I bring to the table, is the ability to analyze, think through, and communicate. And that as I went through, I really dovetailed that with the clinical experience, because I think you can't help but when you see a patient and you see, I'm sure all of you have seen that Paul Farmer died in the last few weeks. And that was one of the things that he said is, focus on the person in front of you and help them as you can. And I think that that is so powerful, right? Because you can help in so many ways, even without the medical degree yet. So really my journey began with this concept of critical thinking, really being exposed and being enamored. I was so happy as I went through, especially during residency. And I remember being a resident at the University of Arizona and having, people were just sick. And I was happy. I was well, I was working all these hours, but I was so happy because I was really in love with the clinical care process. And during this time, I did a lot of work with Physicians for Social Responsibility. Did any of you, are you guys familiar with Physicians for Social Responsibility? So Physicians for Social Responsibility began in the 1960s, and it really began with Helen Caldicott in Australia. And Dr. Caldicott is a pediatrician, and they noticed that strontium was in the teeth of children, in the baby, and that this was because of the nuclear testing. And one of the really powerful statements that Physicians for Social Responsibility came out with is, nuclear war is medically contraindicated. Now, that I just think that, again, we need to think of it within our context, that there are so many things that are just adverse to health, and we want to speak up for our patients. So I was doing this work with Physicians for Social Responsibility. I was in Philadelphia at the time. And Victor Seidel, who is from Einstein and who was one of the leaders for the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, came and spoke. He taught the whole group, but I was in trance, about Rudolf Virchow. And kind of similar to the story that you just heard. So Rudolf Virchow is a pathologist. Both my parents were pathologists, so I felt like, but Rudolf Virchow in Germany really looked at the social context. It's not just about giving a person a medicine, but really understanding the social context. And also this concept of, sending, it's like, why are we taking care of children when they go back to these environments where they're just going to get sick again? It's up to us to fix that environment. And the quote, and I really love this quote, and I try to live this quote. Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a large scale. And I just think that that is incumbent upon us to be active. And again, it's on behalf of our patients, on behalf of our profession, to really work in coalition. Again, all of this, if we keep in the same way that clinically, if you keep the patient as your focus, if you really practice with the patient as your focus, you will always be fine. You will always read what you need. You will always do what you need. And I think part of that healing is doing the advocacy work so that we advocate for our patients. And again, part of what we're doing right now is advocacy for each other, advocacy for the future generations, so that it's easier. And so I very much wanted to come back to Jefferson. My children had moved east, but I really wanted to come back to Jefferson because I felt like Jefferson gave me a chance. And I wanted to make it easier for people who came after me. So I feel this tremendous responsibility to give back. So here are some resources, some advocacy groups. There are lots. The National Hispanic Medical Association, the AMA, the American College of Physicians. I am a former president of the American College of Physicians. And there's a health policy internship that you can apply to as third years. It's a great opportunity. You're on the Hill, you're doing this work. So think about it. And again, I think we both look forward to the conversation and questions that you might have. Those are our emails in case you want to. Thank you. Do you want us to answer questions?
Yeah, we're not going to open up for questions. Just raise your hand. Let us know if you have any questions for them, any questions about their work, any questions about advocacy and what role medical students can take in these roles as well.
Do you want to just go back to the previous slide, please?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
My name is Mary Reeves. I want to know about values. What values do you have for advocacy and also beyond?
What was the second one?
Beyond.
So again, I was a philosophy student, and what I really studied and to me again, all of my life feels like it's all these puzzle pieces that fit together. But it's understanding, right? And you just happen to be there. But if I look at you, right, I can make up all sorts of things. But to try to come and openness, curiosity, and then try to understand. And as much as possible, try to find common threads. Now, it's not always possible. You know, I've been in rooms, right, with people where I come in and I say, oh, you know, grandkids. And you try to find, again, common ground. Not that I have grandkids, but I have children. So, and sometimes it doesn't work, but I think as much as possible to try to find where are we together, what are our common goals, and then proceed forward from there. Sometimes, and I used to do this as an undergraduate, I was much more like, I'm right, this is how it should be, why aren't you agreeing with me? But you realize I'm not always right. And I have a lot to learn. And so I think that respect for the other is really important.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. That's very important, particularly when you're dealing with difficult subjects. You always should partner as opposed to drive alone. Now, one point that I want to make that is an add-on to that is this concept of engagement. Like Star Trek, Picard, engage. And when I started my career as a trainee and later as a junior faculty in academia, the recommendation from all my mentors was always protect your time. Protect your time. Stay away from that. Stay in the lab. Publish this. No, that other thing can wait. And it was, in a sense, it was important as a career builder, but it's against this concept of engagement. My mentor from Puerto Rico said the opposite. He always said, you do not have a pedigree. You're not from Harvard. You're not from Michigan. Nobody knows you. You have an accent. So whenever somebody asks for help, you say yes. So every once in a while, people ask me to do things, and I always have this thing in my head, like, I got to say yes, I got to change everything I'm doing. And one example of that came some years ago. I was called because I was in the VA system, and somebody was putting a group together to go to the legislature to advocate for oxygen for veterans. Oxygen, simple as that, so that they wouldn't have to pay for oxygen on the planes and that sort of thing. This is now quite some time ago. And I went, and it was a great experience because they took me to Washington. I got to meet several senators. I got to depose or speak to a committee about resources for veterans and so forth. I don't know that it made any difference, but I came out of that inspired. I came out of that with a better understanding of the system and how difficult it is to generate a message that gets through when there are 50 other speakers at the same time asking for their own thing. And how the system just works. It gives you a sense of what are the areas that are weakest where you can pinpoint and go after that. So engage respectfully in partnership, always seeking help and advice and a team of people. It's better than being alone, trust me.
Next question? Yes.
So thank you for having us. My name is Michelle, and I'm one at Rutgers University Medical School. And in thinking a lot about policy and advocacy, I come to the conclusion that if I want to get what I want in terms of like for my patients, I somehow have to become a politician. I don't want to do that. So, because I feel like a lot of health and health determinants are determined by policy that I, as a physician, may not have control over. So my question, I guess, is as a student, as a resident, and as a physician, how do you get involved in policy without having to kind of divulge away from medicine?
Sure, I'll start this one. You see, when Ana Maria starts, I get time to think. Okay, I do think, one of the things that is very helpful for advocacy is being part of an organization. There's no need for you to say, well, now I have to do this policy, and now I have to do this alone, and maybe I'm now, but that's not the point. I mean, many organizations already have an infrastructure that includes a lobbying component, that includes a group of people that are involved in advocacy for this and advocacy for that. And you become part of some of those. And you share resources, but also responsibilities for those people. So you don't have to leave the core. Remember, you're being physicians. You better be good at that. You better be good to your patients. You better be outstanding in care. The rest then becomes an add-on, and it becomes difficult. So I agree with you that it's you want to get there, but you also don't want to leave medicine. There is no need to leave medicine, but answer the call as part of a team, and it makes it much easier for you. I think the one example that I will give you today is become engaged in an organization that has a very strong political and lobbying arm that you can participate with. He's shaking his head. He knows that that's true. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah,
What would you say?
so I would agree, absolutely. And also in the quote, that politics is really referring to the sense of being a citizen, being an active citizen. And again, in a very broad sense, not trying to bring in aspects about citizenship in this country right now. But for example, the main organization, but really any professional organization, they will have advocacy work. And I think also that sometimes, here's my perspective on this, is sometimes we're advocating for ourselves, meaning for the profession, and sometimes we really are clearly advocating for our patients. And so you want to see where you land on all of those issues. But I think in partnership, and plus the other thing is you learn a lot about that process. And you learn a lot how to move. It takes, at least my experience has been, I am amazed at how long change takes to happen. But by being there on the one-on-one, I really like this sort of experience. I think that it's the swaying of hearts that ultimately happens.
I think you'll find also that you'll be driven to some things and not others. And you'll be driven based on your interest, but also what you're good at. And the circumstances drive you. I'll give you an example. Because I think examples sort of drive home the message. Some years ago, I was approached by a woman whose child came into the hospital because of severe rectal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock. And 2 or 3 weeks later, she leaves home with her baby with a new diagnosis. That diagnosis was Hermanski food-like syndrome. You guys know what that is? HPS. It's a disease caused by, gives you albinism. It's a genetic disease. Albinism, platelet dysfunction, which is the reason that gives you bleeding. And some of those patients have polyfibrosis or colitis and several other disorders. The worst, there are 10 genes. The worst one is HPS1. You know where is the highest incidence of HPS in the world? Puerto Rico. The highest by 4. So this woman devotes she's a critical care nurse. She gets out of nursing and chooses to develop a Hermanski food-like syndrome network. And for the next 20, 30 years, her daughter's now 30 years old, or 35, I guess. She's devoted to that cause. And one of the first things she does is she says, we need to understand this better. And just helping awareness is not going to be enough. So she calls the NIH, and she describes how a year or two later, she's inviting couples with families, with their kids, from Puerto Rico to their home. And the NIH would come in and in their basement start reading everybody and getting urine samples and all that kind of thing. The NIH describes the first or the second 3 or 4 genes from that group, from that effort. So she's, and then she really gets excited, starts working. What happens? She can't get the message in Puerto Rico. So she knocks on my door and says, would you help me? I had heard about HPS, but it wasn't my thing. So the past 4 years, I've been going to Puerto Rico. You'll see what I'm getting, because the story is getting long. But the point is, we developed an HPS clinic, we developed a pulmonary fibrosis clinic, and after a while, I started doing my numbers, because I'm flying to Puerto Rico every month, every 2 months for 4 years. And I do my numbers, and I said, to be able to care for all the patients in the island, I would need another 55 years. I said, there's no way this is the only road. And that's when I decided it has to be done through legislation. You understand my point?
Yeah.
I didn't want to get there, but the circumstances drive you where you're looking for opportunities and you realize the only one where you're going to have an impact may be that way. It's not for everybody, and it may not work also. But what you're saying is pay attention to the circumstances and how the opportunities show up.
And I think the other, just concrete suggestion, we all face patients every single day, right? They either can get a prescription, there's all of these barriers to care, is have a team-based approach. So that you have somebody who knows how to get prescriptions at low cost for your patients. So you have somebody who can guide the patient. So that team-based approach, it doesn't always have to come.
Could you tell us a little bit about how your identity and sense of self has changed as a result of getting this equity?
Yes. So I don't know that it's changed so much, as I think it's really, so I think, I think I grew up. One, just, my father was a great storyteller, so I would hear these stories, and and at least as I remember them in my head, they're like these stories of injustice and of right winning out. And so I think I just sort of had that growing up. And so I feel like, then the different signposts in my life have really helped that to develop and flourish. And so it's more of a growing into it. I think I grew up, I grew up in Chicago in the 1960s. And I think it was a really, I grew up I went to Catholic school, but it was, we talked about our liberation theology. So it was this very positive and optimistic time for change. And so I feel like that it gave support to those early feelings. And then my education and my opportunities really helped to have that. So I guess I see it as opportunities to flourish and to feel like, and I really, each of you should feel you have a voice, and you have a voice that can change the world. One of the things that I read is, everybody has a gift. And I guess I'd like you to remember this if you can. Everybody has a gift. Find your gift. And a gift is only a gift if you share it. So think about how you're going to share it. But you really do have that power. So encourage you to do that.
Whatever she said. No, I love it. I'm a movie buff, so I don't know if you saw the third Indiana Jones. The second one is not worth it. Okay? And at the end, the son asked Sean Connery, what did you get out of this experience, Dad? And Sean Connery, who's recovering, is saying, illumination. Think about that word. And the other word is inspiration. Every time somebody gives me an opportunity to this, it's not about us being there. It's about somebody giving you an opportunity to help. And you come out of that energized and fired for the next day. That's how it's changed me. And so now it's like for those who are runners and you can't, one day you don't run and now you're dead, your life is bad because you can't run. It's that little narcotic that comes in. There's endorphins that come up when you're able to make a difference for other people. It's just, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
Yes.
I guess my question is sort of similar, but I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's like a young person in medical training that already feels a sense of weight or burden with seeing how many inequities and disparities exist. And that's just me like starting my training. So I wanted to know if you have felt that throughout your years of advocacy and what you've done to sort of cope with that and not let it deter your motivation and your fire.
Yeah, it's done, and sometimes you're angry.
Yeah.
I mean, just watch CNN today and look at what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, but it can't paralyze you. It should energize you. Okay? So I don't have a magic bullet against that. I think if you're not exposed, you'll never be charged with doing something. So you must be exposed to that. You must see that. You must get angry with that to be able to consider doing something. Huh? So, but in that anger, instead of paralyzing, you should be to help you strategize. Well, how do I do that? Another thing that now with my third story, I was in Brazil once visiting, giving a lecture, and the main organizer is driving in his car around Florianópolis, which is gorgeous. Anybody from Brazil? Okay. It's not Latin America. Okay, so he's driving me around and I said, you know, what's I don't know why we've been drinking, maybe, I don't know. I said, what is the meaning of life goal? And this gentleman is much older than me and he says, you know what? The meaning of life for me is acquiring wealth and power. And I was like, whoa. I did not expect that. I said, that's not what he stops the car on the side of the road and said, Jesse, wealth and power so you can help other people. And then he starts talking about how he has had so many opportunities to do something, but he didn't have the capacity to find the wealth, the money, or the decision-making power to make a change. And so he decided that he's going to climb through the section chief, the division chief, the chair, and all that kind of thing, so that he had the power to make change.
Yeah.
Be good at what you do. You will be asked to go into those positions. Use that power.
I have a question.
Good.
So it's more related, I guess, like smaller scale. I know based on what I've read and heard from like residents and even medical students doing their clerkships, sometimes they see like injustice happening to their patients in the hospital, you know, and many times like they say they don't say anything, and you know, I try to put myself in their position too. And I think about like all the things that I might lose if I do speak up, or if I do organize maybe to change certain, you know, behaviors and issues like around the patients. I guess my question is like, how do we go about it? Because, you know, I've worked in the medical field before and I've seen, you know, many injustices and I've felt like very powerless. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come into medicine. And now that I've given the opportunity to start doing clerkships and then later residency, I just want to know how to behave about it, you know, like, so as to not put myself in a bad situation, but at the same time also like help my patients, you know, and like also moving forward. Yeah.
We're going to tie those two together. That first,
I'm really grateful that you see me, because not everybody does. And then I think it really is measured, right? It's so hard to know, and I think also be gentle with yourself and trust that there may be times where you say where you act. There may be times where you choose not to act. And you may second guess yourself either way, but you're making the best choice that you can with the information at that time. And sometimes it may be okay to just, it may be something that you do behind that door. I had when I was in Arizona, there was an orthopedic attendant, and she would call it guerrilla medicine. She would say, we practice guerrilla medicine at times, where you bring the patient in late at night because they can't get in otherwise and they don't have money, and so you have a volunteer team and you take care and you do what needs to be done for the patient. So again, you have to know what is your scope, where do you have control, and then try to exert control where you can. But I really think it's important to be gentle with yourself. There are times, and I remember really, really clearly, at the early part of medical school, I was completely overwhelmed. I mean, if you look at all that's negative in the world, there's a lot, and it can be paralyzing. And so then, and the other part is, if you do that too much, you won't be able to have the wealth and power to make the change. So your job, part of it is to be successful in your role and to finish so that you can be part of the change.
I like what Maria said, and because it sounded like you were quite bothered by an event. Okay. When you see these things happening, you realize, if you step back a little bit, you realize there's a structural issue. It's not about a particular individual. It's not about this or that. It's a structural issue that people have missed. Okay? Tackling the structural issue is much better. First, you have a better impact on more people, but it's less personal. When you tackle an event, you're tackling the people engaged in that event. That becomes problematic. I'm not saying shy away from that, it's a big deal. But I'm saying more often than not, you find that these are structural issues of an organization. And by tackling that issue in that wide area, you are perceived as perhaps more rational, more thoughtful about it. And if you make a change, you actually change it for a lot of people, not just for that individual. I like the concept of being gentle with yourself, and also being very cool about things. Because you want to exert change and you want people to open doors as opposed to, here she comes again. That's not the way to do this. There's a strategy to all of this. And you need to strategize about what is your best persona, what's your best approach, your best strategy to engage in a particular problem. It's thoughtful, it's considerate, it's deliberate. It's not about let's just fix it. It's take your time, figure what needs to be done. And get the right partners and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You start feedback here first.
Hi, first I want to thank you for talks. They're very inspiring. Seeing as how the health inequities are so ingrained in the system, and seeing as how conversations about addressing said ingrained systemic issues really aren't very productive in this political age, do you think we as physicians should really be pushed to move after a small career in medicine into politics? And if so, do you think an organization such as this one should have some kind of systemic, structured program to foster that movement?
Oh, that's a good one.
I don't think everyone needs to be in politics in a formal way. I really do think this the sense of being an activated citizen in society is really important. The politics comes from the Greenwood Forest in the city. As far as LMSA, for LMSA to be involved in advocacy is really important. And the legislators love talking about the students. I think you have a very, very powerful voice from that perspective. But why do you feel that the conversations are fruitless?
Well, there are states in the country that are making it illegal to talk about systemic inequalities that exist in the nation, right? And it doesn't look like there's any movement to go against that, looking at this short and long-term political.
So it may not, and again, everyone's path is different, right? So one person may look at that and go, like there's a lot of stuff going down in Texas, so I'm going to go to Texas. I don't know if there's anyone here from Texas. And I'm going to try to.
I didn't say a word.
Try to address some of these issues myself. I mean, that's definitely an action. I think there is a lot of activity that's trying to be done in that example. And I think there's also something about thinking of where is my world of control? Where is it that I see inequities? Where is it that I can make progress? And it really is, I don't know if you've all read, there's a book called The 100th Monkey. But it's really about social change and about swinging minds and about, it's like there's a tipping point. There are things that we thought of, for example, even just to say LGBT in public space. There are things that we thought of, like we would never be able to say. We can say that. So it may seem small, but don't. There are people everywhere trying to make change, and I think the other thing is to be very, very aware. There are very strong structural forces that are fighting to prevent that. But the only way that we can do that, I think, is for us to have enough of us and enough of us activated and ready so that we can hit the influence.
Very well said. I also don't think that everybody has to become a politician. I, again, tackle the problem and decide whether the most effective way for you is that approach or another approach. But there are multiple ways to become politically involved, like supporting the right candidate, supporting the right vote, writing, talking, conferences, radio. I mean, there are multiple ways and you can be engaged as a citizen or as a member of an organization and so forth. Ramon chose the route of becoming a revolutionary. That was his choice. He probably was the person who actually had the capacity to do so. Not all of us do, but I think for many, many years, physicians, we have often, many of us, and I'm going to include me, not Maria, we're busy, so we stay. It's not our job. Now, my job is here with this patient. I'll do my best with this patient. What we're saying is that time is gone and past. It's time to do more. There are currently forces in medicine that suggest that physicians should not be involved in this kind of work. That this is for the politicians. I mean, that's in our own profession. There's questions about the role of a physician in engaging in these discussions. What I are trying to tell you is engage. Find a way how to do it. It doesn't have to be in whatever you think that you're more prepared to deliver.
This is actually our last question. I've been waiting for that.
Yeah. So I was actually excited to be on a panel about health equity that both of you guys were specialists, because I think, like, as you were saying now, I think traditionally, people have looked at things like community engagement and been like, oh, like, if anything, that's the role of our, primary care physicians, like advocacy, that's their job. So my question is, have you found a lot of your colleagues engaging in this type of work too? And do you think there's support for this kind of work within your profession?
Go ahead.
So I think it's very variable, and I also think, again, the political, being an advocacy, rather, being involved in advocacy, And this is just me as a person. I have a lot of difficulties like advocating for, hey, pay me more money. And that's sometimes a little bit of what my subspecialty organization is about. And so so that my work with the American College of Physicians, which was much more alignment and value with me, because we were really talking about how can I tell my patient, why should insulin cost so much? It shouldn't. How can we get broadband to everybody so that during the pandemic? So I think it's a matter of so I think it varies. But I also think you always have, you figure out where your values are, where your alignment is, and then feel comfortable to vote with your feet. Find your people.
Yeah, I think to answer your question from my standpoint, there are not lots and lots of people engaged in this type of work. When you ask around and you meet them, you realize that a lot of people are interested. All of it, people are bugged about what's going on, yet they're like you. Just because you're a little more advanced in your career doesn't mean you're better at identifying opportunities to engage and so forth. So they're looking for opportunities, but next day I have 20 patients to see in clinic and I have only 15 minutes to see them, and I just do that. And they require some help to bring them in. I think over time that's going to change. One thing that was interesting to me about COVID times is that most people think COVID sort of pulled them away from all these questions. So busy, you're doing more moonlighting, you're working here, everybody's in a mask, social distancing, all that kind of stuff. I saw more people talking about these very issues in COVID than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Because the concept of moral injury started to evolve. This idea, how come this person has COVID, this doesn't? How come this person can be treated and this one doesn't? How come this person already came with a susceptibility factors and this one doesn't? How come this is related to a civic program? I mean, all these questions started to happen. And people are getting angry and anxious, COVID is there. What an incredible opportunity to activate them. Now that COVID is gone, let's not forget about that. We talked about this during COVID, now we have the time to go after that so that when the next COVID comes, COVID wait. We are better prepared. So I think you're right that you don't see this much. Many people engage in this, but when you ask, there's a lot of enthusiasm for doing so. We just don't know how. We need to prepare more opportunities for that.
So I do think that there is also because of the sense of, people talk about burnout in medicine, et cetera. And, you all know that when you're depressed, you're not likely to be active. So I do think this ties into it being really important to have wellness so that you can feel inspired and you can feel a sense of self-efficacy. I can. It's really important to have that sense that I can. And also that advocacy can mean going to the Hill, but advocacy can also mean working within your space. So like this 15-minute appointments, right? Who says that's why it has to be? It's some administrator. The administrator knows more medicine than you. Does the administrator know more about how to take care of people than you? No. So you guys should say, no. I really want you to feel empowered. We did a survey with the American College of Physicians, and most people said, I am not a decision maker. You are decision makers. You can vote with your feet. You can make changes in your practice setting together, right? I mean, you can say things like, you like to run in the morning, so you come in at 9. I want to go pick kids up at 4, so I'm going to come in early so I can do that. I mean, we can work these sort of things out as humans. So really feel empowered that you can make change. It's really when, and again, these structural forces that exist, it's to those structural forces benefit that you feel like I'm a cog in the wheel and I do my job. You are not cogs in the wheel, incredibly bright people. And on top of that, you are Latinos. So,
You know, the leaders are looking for ideas to do these things. They're overwhelmed too. You think they're at home watching TV all day long? My God, can you imagine administrators trying to deal with supply and demand and all these things during COVID time? They're looking for you guys for assistance and looking for things that the hospital, the administrators can do. Talking about the 15 minutes, we were one of those who said, we're not going to do the 15 minutes. But we're going to show you that if we have more time, there will be increase in satisfaction. We're going to get more people. And we're going to get new and higher volumes of patients in because they're going to be happier. And we did. But
yeah,
you got to work at it. No? And you can't just say, well, we can't do that. It can be done.
it's a quit.
Those are some perfect last words. Thank you so much. Please help me around.
I know